Good morning. A very warm welcome to all of you. My name is Dharmendra Kanani, Director of Insights at Friends of Europe, for this discussion and debate around EU-Asia digital recovery and investment, and what all that means in terms of trade, relations, geopolitics, etc., and more. This debate that we have an hour with you is both, we have two sets of audiences. We have our Zoom audience here, and we also have a live stream audience too. A warm welcome to both of you. This is a debate that we're doing in partnership with HCL, a large booming, a successful company from India, but doing stuff all across the world as well. So very pleased to be partnering with them on this particular debate. Before I say a few words about the debate itself, so some rules of engagement. For those of you on Zoom who are familiar with this, please make sure that your screen is on, your name is on your screen, and that you are muted. What we'll do is when you want to ask a question, it'd be really helpful if you use the virtual hand. And if you don't know where it is, go to the participants icon, press that, and you'll see there's a virtual hand. So use that so we know that you want to come in to ask a question, raise a query, or be frustrated, whatever you like, but put your hand up. That'll be helpful. Before that though, keep yourselves on mute. And I'd also encourage those of you on Zoom to use the chat function, because sometimes I can't get around to all of you, and there'll be issues and things you want to discuss. Put them on the chat, So, and also if you want to ask a question, I can't get to you and speakers haven't got time, put it on the chat, and people, and I can assure you, speakers historically and traditionally have responded to your questions. So please use that function also. Those of you on live stream, a very warm welcome to you also. You are not left out, you are warmly welcomed. But what I'd like you to do is use the hashtag FOE debate to log your query, question, and frustration or otherwise to engage in this debate also, and we'll get you online also for any questions. So that's the kind of rules of engagement. As I said, we have an hour, we have a number of speakers from the public, private sector and the independent sector. And so I'm looking forward to welcoming them to have this conversation, which I said is about EU-Asia digital investments for recovery and the relationship between two significant regions in Europe and the world, where in the context of the economic crisis we find ourselves, we know that digital has become the lifeline for all people, communities, individuals, societies, countries, etc. We have a long-standing history of what is happening to the big tech players in the world. We've seen what's happened most recently in Washington with the big players in terms of being held and putting their feet to fire about their capabilities and what they're doing and their domination in the market, and issues of privacy and data. What we also know is that in the East, we've got some of the largest platforms emerging, and Taobao in China has greater traffic than Amazon. And we also know in terms of population growth that in the future, in the next 10 years, the tech world will be bending and leaning towards the South, as in Africa and Asia, given the demographics in terms of both their youth population, but also generally the population per se. What we do know is some dynamics have changed, even most recently. We've seen the regional economic partnership, if I've got that right, that just happened this weekend, actually, of some of the biggest states in Asia coming together to form a bloc. And they represent between them the same kind of GDP as India and China and more, and the West. So there's a huge opportunity taking place there in the East. And often, one of the issues for, I think, Europe is that it's traditionally looked West. And one of the propositions here is that how do you look east first sometimes, actually in the context of the economic growth and the population growth and the technological advancements in the East, how do you ensure we get the best out of this relationship? And how do we make it a different kind of relationship and reset it on the basis of mutuality, trust, but also accountability? But at the heart of it, it's about how do citizens profit, benefit, and secure better livelihoods. So that's what's on the agenda for discussion. I'd like to warmly welcome first Ashish. Ashish, hello. Good morning. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for partnering with us. Ashish, it's good to have you with us. Tell us, from your point of view, you've grown in scale over the years. You're a large player now. From your perspective, what are the challenges and opportunities for a tech player in the context of where we find ourselves? There's a major crisis underway at the moment, but we know that most of the tech players, their profit margins have soared through the roof because of what's happening in terms of digital. And not painting any fingers to you, I know you've done well too. No, but on a serious note, what are the challenges and opportunities we find ourselves in right now in the context of EU-Asia relations that you would like to share with us that might point us in the direction from a private sector player of the things that we need to be thinking about? Ashish, welcome, and over to you.
Okay, thanks, Darvind. Good morning to all of you, and good afternoon, good evening if people are joining from outside. So let me first start by just talking about HCL just for a second, right? We are a large IT services firm, about $10 billion in size, and as Dharmen said, we've been growing roughly at 4 times the industry average over the last 3 to 4 years, right? One of the things which we are very well known for is a philosophy which we call as employees first, customer second, and just recently we got recognized by Forbes as one of the top 30 employers globally, right? Because of the employee practices which we take. Now, the way I like to always think about ourselves as a firm is, we do a lot of things in tech, right? But it's exactly how we do things. A company with a heart, which really starts to bring things in a manner which is coincident with what the sort of industry needs, right? So let's talk about this whole thing about COVID. COVID is obviously a massive crisis, right? But I've always believed that a crisis on the other side of the coin is an opportunity in disguise, right? Now, this is a much larger crisis. The implications of this crisis are going to be much larger. But I think all of us understand, if there is one sector which is really helped the economy globally come together and continue to function, it has been the technology sector, right? Technology certainly is a lot more central in what we do every day in terms of running not just the economy and corporations and organizations underneath it, but almost every sphere of life we are able to do, including this conference, we are able to do remotely using tech, right? So technology, I think, has become a lot more central to how things work. So when I now look at, yes, Dharmendra, if there's a question.
No, carry on.
Okay. So when I look at opportunities, right, the way I think about this is, see, we have a once in a lifetime opportunity to stop hurtling on the path which we have done for the last 30 years, right? I think all of us understood as we were hurtling down that path that it was quite unsustainable. I personally believe that, over the next 20 years, if we use technology more as an underpinning to reinvent the trajectory of all of us, in society, we'd get to a better place, right? And let me sort of enumerate that from two aspects, right? The first is, I think there is an urgent need for us to reset economic foundations from what I'll call as wild to click. Now, this is not my term. This is a term which I read and I just love it, right? And let me explain what that means, right? From wasteful, from idle, from lopsided, from dirty, to circular, lean, inclusive, and clean, right? Those are the pivots which I think the economy needs to make, right? And underpinning all of this is really going to be technology, right? And that is something which I believe is a massive opportunity for organizations and governments all across the world. And we should not lose sight of that massive opportunity which this crisis presents. The second part is, we've seen a lot of sort of protectionism, a lot of issues which have really hampered growth of global trade, right? And all of us understand that the last 30, 40, 50 years, the prosperity which the world has seen, a lot of it has been driven by global trade in both goods and services, right? Now, the way I think about the world is, today, if you think about the world, it's about 90% physical, right? Over a period of time, you're going to start getting into more and more digital and more social, right? Now, digital, is really going to help you pivot from what I just said, wild to clean. And social, you have to really go from the world we see social today, fake, deep fake, and all the negatives of social, right, to social, which is really going to help bring people together, right? And the same technology can be used to sort of enable that. So we really need to reimagine the world using technology, which impacts digital and social, and brings all of it together under leadership, which I think we need to see a lot more of from leaders who are sort of leading us. So So that's
Okay.
really the opportunity, right?
Okay.
The second part is really around challenges. In my
Yeah.
mind, the challenges are around balkanization of data in many ways is going to
Hmm.
be a big challenge, right? There's this syndrome of not invented here. It
Hmm.
reminds me of a story. Actually, I went to a client of mine, and this client sort of said, they have about 463 ways in which they procure hand gloves, right? And 456 or 463 varieties of hand glove specifications, right? And it's just a good example of we don't need to reinvent everything. We don't need to reimagine every aspect. There are great stuff happening in different parts of the world, including in Asia and in Europe. And we need to just start, giving it more scale so that we can create less friction, right? And maybe the last point, which I'd sort of make here, is that I think there is also a very urgent need to get people who are creating the rules and creating, the paradigm for how, competition should be, and the
Hmm.
technology industry to, get in dialogue much more than we have done in the past. The technology industry doesn't help itself because we talk a lot of technical mumbo jumbo, right? But if we get this dialogue happening, I think, create using technology to underpin the new trajectory of where we could go to is something
Hmm.
which is, I would say,
Okay.
very, very.
Okay, Ashish, thank you for that. And I don't wish to answer this question, but to think about it, because I think what you've set out is absolutely a useful way of thinking, both as you said about the role of technology in the future, but what some of the barriers might be, or the challenges. But there's politics, and there's rules and standards. And that's obviously going to guide a lot of this discussion, especially in the context of what we're seeing, what's happening in America with the tech giants. There's something about the freedom of the movement of capital and goods in Europe, and Europe trying to protect its sense of sovereignty, but also its relationship with the East. It would be good to understand from your perspective what might need to change if a company like yourself, that, as you say, you've grown exponentially, to not only become just one of those big tech giants that has a kind of a sense of power, but to cooperate and collaborate in a different way and to learn from that experience. But I'll come back to you on that. I want to move to Isabel. Isabel, who's a long-standing friend of the house. You're a trustee, but you also hold important positions in wider society. Isabel, what's the state of play in relation to the tech industry in relation to Asia? And what do you think we need to do in terms of protecting the consumer and citizen, or enabling the consumer and citizen? Over to you, Isabel.
Thank you. So I would like to raise three things.
Yeah.
First of all, it was just said that COVID-19 could be an opportunity. Yes, it's true, but it's also a big opportunity for the big tech industry and the big platforms. When you look at the financial gains that the
Yes.
biggest one did, that's even sometimes obscene regarding the situation of a lot of people in developing countries and even in Europe. We have also to know that where are located those big platforms, and especially how the market value are shared, and they are not very fairly shared because the market value is concentrated in two countries, China and US. It accounts for 90% of the market value of the world's largest platforms. Some additional platforms in Asia, in South Korea, in Japan, and several in Europe. It means, and it shows the magnitude of the challenge in order to have the economic benefit of those platforms, and not only to be the client of the biggest one. Second things, and Stefan will speak about that, I think, it's related to the connectivity. And it's true that sometimes we are perceiving Asia as well connected. Yes, it's true for some parts, but you have to know that for UNCTAD, we are counting that. And in countries like Afghanistan, even India, Laos, Myanmar, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Turkmenistan, we less than half of the population is an internet user. It means that, of course, connectivity is also a big challenge for this region, especially in the rural areas. The third thing is, yes, we have to look, and the role of the tech industry is key. Nevertheless, the role of the government, and especially the European Commission, regarding the rules of the game, because the rules of the game are, of course, not fair. We know how important it is and how difficult it is also for the European Commission to impose new rules in the system for the future digitalization. And last thing that I would like to put on the table in order to feed the debate is the women issue. And I like to stress that because it's often forgotten when we explore the link between private sector and policy development processes. Because tech industry is very male-oriented.
Indeed.
Especially. And it's why it's so important to really make visible, but also to really empower women in this sector. And I think that we need a community of women digital entrepreneurs in South Asia, in Southeast Asia, and UNCTAD is working on that. I could explain that later. That was the three things that I wanted to say from the beginning.
Thank you, and thank you for kind of, it's a broad tapestry of issues, but I'm also very pleased that you've brought in the gender issue, and we've seen how women are reshaping the world at the moment in different ways. We've seen that in the United States, we've seen that in the east of Europe and elsewhere, and actually, but they are left out of the game on tech, but not out of volition. It's actually about how women and girls are being encouraged to enter the industry, but also what happens within the industry. And what would be interesting to hear from you very, very briefly is that you've described the nature of the problem. You're in the, you're in UNCTAD and you've been in the commission. I mean, you've been in Europe as a deputy prime minister of Belgium, etc. From your perspective, if you were to say, if there's one thing the EU might do in this space, given its rule setting, standard setting role, and what it wants to do to improve EU-Asia relations, what would that be from your perspective? So we get some reactions from the audience.
Yeah, so first, I think...
it's a hard question. Go
on. What EU did on data protection is fantastic. They were the first in order to start with the LGDP, with all the consequences, because now this LGDP, and I see that in the developing countries, it become the base of the discussion for other countries. And I would like, and I hope that EU could not only defend and develop its own technology, what is important, develop European platforms in order to be part of the game, but also, and that's just what I said, regarding the rules. And I know that Madame Vestager is doing a lot trying to make the market a little bit more fair, but I think that it's key that the EU could really stay the organization or the region promoting rules, and rules which are not only protecting the data, but also giving a market which is more better share. That's the two things: developing technology in EU and trying to look how EU could become really a player in order to be a partner for Asia. And secondly, the rules and the rules of the games. That I think that it's key for the European Commission.
Thank you, Isabel. Well, and I'm glad you said that, because I mean, Human Rights Watch only came out recently with a report about the relationship between issues around human rights, data protection, abuses as also. We also know within Europe, we have two states blocking the biggest recovery package in the world. It's quite a dilemma for the EU to then promote that when two of its large countries of its membership are saying, you know what, we don't like the rule of law, but just give us the money. I want you to think about that, because I think that becomes quite a difficult challenge for us to say to the rest of the world, follow the rule of law and all the standards, etc. Yet we've got two in our backyard who are saying, you know what, we don't like that. We don't like independent law, etc. So we have to think about that, don't we, when we're preaching to others. And I'm glad, though, we'll come back to the gender issue, because I think it's an important one. Thank you, and we'll come back to you in that. I want to bring Stefan Schnorr. Stefan, hello, warm welcome to you.
Good morning, Narendra. Hello.
Hello, thank you. I mean, Germany has the presidency. You are in prime position to be developing some of these issues that we're talking about today. And I know you have it on the agenda for the presidency. First, I want you to touch upon what's your experience, what's Germany's experience been in collaborating with Asia? Huge, it's not a monolith. I mean, but that's a massive question, because it's so diverse. Because when people think about Asia, they think about the successful economies. They don't think about, as Isabel pointed out, the diversity and the differences between them. So what's your experience been? And I suppose associated with that, what do we need to do from your perspective in better infrastructure development and communication? Over to you, Stefan.
Yeah, Dharmendra, thank you very much for your question. And indeed, Asia is a vibrant economic region with dynamic markets and a strong capacity. You mentioned some examples in your introduction. Just last Sunday, 50 nations in the Asia-Pacific regions signed the world's largest free trade agreement. So if you want to be successful globally as a company, you will definitely have to put a special focus on Asia. So we look to West and to East, as you asked in the beginning. Sometimes I have the impression that when I say Asia, people here in Germany, and I think mostly also in Europe, hear China. It's true that China is Germany's most important trading partner with a volume of trade of almost 200 million euros last year. So the federal government of Germany attached great importance to the German-Chinese cooperation and coordination. We have established a comprehensive partnership and engaged in about 80 dialogue mechanisms with China. At the same time, we are fully aware that Asia is much bigger. 2 months ago, in September this year, our federal government adopted guidelines for its future policy in the Indo-Pacific region, and these guidelines combine numerous measures, both existing and planned, to create a coherent political framework. They also reflect Germany's interest in diversifying and deepening its relations both geographically and in substance, so we can strengthen ties with the global players of tomorrow. One important commitment in the guidelines is to expand connectivity to both to and within Asia. At the core of this commitment, of course, the cooperation with our European partners to ensure the swift and comprehensive implementation of the EU-Asia connectivity strategy. We will also support the strategy with bilateral engagement, building on existing cooperation. Our National Development Agency, for example, the GIZ, supports the Asian Connectivity Division and its staff to effectively implement their own master plan on connectivity. Connectivity is all about networks, from transport links to energy or digital networks. And connectivity has a very obvious human dimension, the cooperation in education, research, and in innovation. We seek to expand our cooperation in the area of digital transformation and key technologies, and the Asian countries are very, very attractive partner in this context. We have engaged what we call in our ministry the so-called bilateral digital dialogues with Japan, with South Korea, with India, with Singapore. These dialogues are of most important instrument of our digital policy with countries outside the European Union. The overarching goal is to make the opportunities offered by digitization available to everyone in the best possible way. While the topics that we put on the agenda might vary from country to country, we attach great importance to the active involvement of the industry and of associations, academia, and civil society. Issues that are typically discussed during those digital dialogues include digital governance and inclusivity, standards and technical regulation, policy environment for the development and application of artificial intelligence, and the free flow of data, data sovereignty, and data protection. Our digital dialogues are also an opportunity to identify projects on which startups, SMEs, companies might cooperate. We have seen this, for example, in the Industry 4.0 sector, in research, development, and in standardization so far, and we hope to see more industry-driven cooperation in the future. We also have our Central Innovation Program, and there we have concrete projects between companies from Germany and from Asia states. We believe that compliance with international standards, and you also mentioned this, sustainability, transparency, and sound financing play a key role in these projects. So when developing connectivity, it is important for us to facilitate fair competition, to avoid excessive debts on the part of the recipient countries, and to ensure transparency and sustainability. The EU-Asia connectivity strategy addresses precisely these conditions, and it's therefore a good basis for the cooperation in the spirit, and this is important, in the spirit of a partnership. My Minister Peter Altmaier has made it clear on several occasions that Germany is prepared to play a constructive role in the implementation of this EU strategy, and we also work on this during our presidency, as you mentioned. And that is exactly what we do, in the interest of good trade relations and the interest of trusting cooperation. So I am all the more pleased that we are talking about this intensification of the cooperation today. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to our debate.
Stefan, thank you very much. And I know that you can't answer this question, but I want to pose it because all that you say is great. And, you know, absolutely the right thing in terms of strategy. But what we do know is that the public bank in Europe is bust. We've borrowed more than we've ever done in history. We also know that that's also an issue in most Asian countries, with the exception of China and others, and Japan and Singapore, etc. We know there's been a sharp move towards the Indo-Pacific in terms of, Germany and France, and now Netherlands have joined that too. So there's that sense of where the market might be in the future, given the context we find ourselves in. But there are difficulties in this relationship. There are difficulties in this relationship. And, I suppose the kind of issue around infrastructure and data and what we do about data is going to be central. It'd be good if you could just, if you can, dish the dirt, and I mean that in the sense of what are the kind of issues that we need to really grapple with if we're going to move this forward. And one of the things I'm minded to raise here is that small to medium enterprises, Stefan, are the bulwark of European success and its economy. We know that, okay? But the majority of them haven't created the transition and don't have the capacity or the finance to move to being much more tech savvy and be digitally literate. I mean, how do we deal with that? Very big questions, I know, but there's significant ones if we're going to move this in the right direction without sleepwalking into a situation where there'll be an imbalance in the relationship.
I think that we as a government has to do everything to enable the cooperation between the companies. That is the most relevant point for us, to give the companies the floor to cooperate. And we have to find the right balance, especially in the field of, for example, free flow of data, because the most future services will be based on data. So we have to find solutions for free flow of data between Europe, between Asia, between America, between all parts of the world. We have to deal with questions of cybersecurity. And the main important part for us is, in my opinion, to give to discuss together with other states the circumstances for our framework. And we have to design this framework in a partnership with all stakeholders. This is very important. And indeed, we have some difficulties when we discuss the free flow of data with other states. But we have to find solutions step by step. Perhaps not the end version of our business model that we want to reach, but we have to work in this direction.
Okay, Stefan, thank you. And colleagues, on Zoom, I know it's early and it's good to watch, but this is not about just participating as an observer. We want you to engage as much as possible in the conversation because you're all part of this discussion rather than simply a Q&A with the speakers. So you will have experiences, you will have thoughts and views on some of the questions I'm posing, but what our speakers say, please use your virtual hand and engage. I know I have one already, so thank you. But I encourage all of you, please do engage in the debate. See what you see what you think about what's been said so far. We have the ambassador from Kenya. A warm welcome to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, my brother.
Hello, very good to welcome you.
Yeah, you can hear me?
I can indeed, sir. You
want my intervention?
Please, I do.
Wonderful. First of all, thank you very much for this invitation. I just want to ask one or two questions. One is our brother Gupta. He has come up with a very interesting concept, unlike other companies, where he's talking about employees first is instead of customers first, while change in the paradigm, number one. Then Isabel, I like what you said. These are men-dominated worlds, especially on matters technology. What needs to be done so that women are visible in the technology sector? Thank you.
Ambassador, before you go, so I kind of, because this is what we do at Friends of Europe. This is about making sure we kind of critically inquire and engage and challenge so we can get the best out of this. What's your view? Because, Kenya has a long history. You've been successful in various ways. From your perspective, what can we do to encourage women and girls in the tech sector? What do you see happening from your perspective?
Two things, Mr. Chairman. One, of course, there must be a deliberate effort in terms of policy. Whether in the private sector or government, we must have gender positive policy in the sense that there's a deliberate effort to promote gender participation in the tech sector. Number two, when it comes to capacity building, I think also it's very important to capacity build deliberately in those areas. And finally, of course, in our training, we must encourage more and more women to enter into science related to technology. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to pick, we've got quite a few ambassadors in the audience. I'd be interested to bring some of you in to this conversation. And I know a good friend from Costa Rica. You're going to look at me and think, oh no, Damendra, you're asking me? Unprepared? I am indeed. You haven't put your hand up, but I can see you on screen. So I want to bring you in. Please come in. I'd really be interested in Costa Rica, from your perspective, where you sit, geopolitically, in terms of this particular debate. Just share with us some of your reflections of your experience on this agenda that we're talking about right now. So welcome. Hello.
Thank you very much. Of course, it's a very relevant issue, more for the development countries, because it's a great opportunity. It's an opportunity that give us the chance to enter in new kind of economic relationships and selling services. Costa Rica has a cluster of national enterprises that sells technology and digital technology all over Latin America. Is quite big successful sector in the economy, and by now these developments are basically basically set in the Latin American region, and even a little bit in the United States. But I think crossing the Atlantic could be a great opportunity for us. I'm not saying trying to sell in Asia, but that requires a lot of preparation. That is not an easy issue. Requires, for example, be fit to enter to markets with high regulations in data privacy, for example. And normally bringing equality of rules in our countries that in the in big markets like the EU. But those challenges can be achieved and can be worked, but it takes time. It takes time. Not only the preparation of the people.
Okay, sure.
For the tasks, that is one of the biggest challenges, but also being fit to enter into the big markets.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for responding. Sorry to pick on you, but I thought we often think, when we think about in this debate, I know it's about EU-Asia, but there's also the same comparisons in terms of the potential growth and capability in Latin America that we often overlook. And there are similarities, whilst there are significant differences, but there are very many similarities. I want to bring in Yuan Li Shriver from Erasmus University. Yuan?
Thank you.
Hello.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Hello, good morning to everybody. Thank you. I would like to use this opportunity to ask a question. Like Isabella just mentioned, about 90% of this digital platform are owned by Chinese or companies in the United States. It has been bother me for quite some time. Why in Europe we cannot have international company that could also provide this kind of digital service, at least in European, larger European region? Is that because of the, like also a speaker earlier mentioned, all the technology there, we do not need to invent everything, but just use that for this region. Like in China, most people use the WeChat, which is really, you cannot live without WeChat anymore. And in Europe, we use WhatsApp, but WhatsApp is not owned by a European company. Moreover, the function is very limited. So I just sometimes do not understand why there's not a huge European company in doing this business.
Indeed, and my sense is you know the answer to that question actually, because you know what issues are around values, geopolitics, and others. But I will bring Isabel into this. But you're quite right. There is that question about that, what both the Ashish and others of you raised, and Isabel has raised. But there is that thing about the way in which the East is looked at in terms of curiosity, lack of faith, and a sense that we are concerned, the West is concerned about what might happen in terms of issues around transparency and accountability. And these are big issues that need to be dealt with. But you're quite right. When I think about my time in Beijing, this is 5 years ago, and how WeChat, you did everything with that. You paid as a group, you did everything. Light years ahead in terms of the capabilities. Isabel, briefly, before I move on to Helani, Isabel, do you want to comment on that point? You're muted. You're muted. You need to unmute.
Yes.
Lovely.
Yes. A small reaction. The problem is not, of course, the ownership of the companies, and if it is in China or in the US, the problem is especially the fact that those companies, and especially the business model of those companies, the platformization, is a system where it appears that the economic benefits of those companies are not well shared. The problem is not that it's located in the US or in China. The problem is, of course, how the EU or Africa or even South Asia or East Asia are really trying to also develop platforms on the business model that the other started to with that. So the problem is not the ownership, it's really the business model, which is very, very specific to the system with data and platformization, that the two engine of the digitalization system. And in this system, they started before, and now they have all the economic benefit, and all the other are only clients. So it's why it's important that South and East Asia, but also EU could really develop their own platforms. The problem is also the merging of the platforms. Sometimes it's down when, for instance, a small platform is emerging in Africa. Very soon it will be absorbed or merged with the biggest one for economic reasons. But at the end, it's really a problem for the emerging platforms. And the second issue that I would like to say is innovation. It's really important that the EU, and especially through the Green Deal of the European Commission, that we can really support innovation. There is a lot of innovators in the EU, but probably they are going to the US or to China in order to really be supported concretely. So it's why all the eight state aids are also to be revised. What I think that the European Commission has in its priorities.
Isabel, thank you. And that the point you make last is one which is well trodden and well known, is that good ideas flourish in Europe, but then they get scaled up in China or Russia or elsewhere. I mean, the US more so. And I mean, Andre, one of our last speakers, has a lot to say on that matter, which I'm sure I'll bring him into that. But thank you for responding in those terms. But I would encourage those of you on Zoom, it would be good to know what your reaction is to what UN said, because it's one of those uncomfortable conversations. And I think that we don't actually eye it effectively. I think your answer, absolutely, Isabel, you're quite right. There are issues about the business model, but I suppose in the kind of perception, world of perception, if India came up with a platform that competed with, let's say, what Tencent and others are doing in a WeChat platform for Europe, what would be the reaction? Would we have a similar reaction to India as we do with China? And that's not to bat for China. I'm just thinking, what are the cultural dimensions here that we need to think about, especially if we're going to get EU-Asia relationships right? I want to move to Helene, and so please do put on the web chat, on the Zoom chat, your views on that issue that she's raised. And thank you, for raising it. I want to move to Helene. Helene, I want to move to how a different dimension of this conversation, which is about how can connectivity, how can this kind of this new world that we're entering, that's moving at a pace beyond our belief, dealing with issues around sustainability and poverty, those issues that we forget about. So whilst young people all over the world are spending 94%, of what they do on a mobile phone, and others, those that have access to it. What we do know is the poorest in our communities, whether that's in Europe and elsewhere, are on the margins and left out. But there's also the issue around sustainability. Over to you, Helene.
Thank you. So I think the evidence around sort of what this does for people is also positive and negative. So I work in South Asia and Southeast Asia, not China. So let me, put that caveat on. The evidence very systematically, it's very clear between ICTs and developments. They make markets work better, so people make more money. They help people find jobs. The ICTs help people find jobs. They help with delivery of education, and even in some of the poorer countries, just having a basic phone to connect to a teacher during COVID has shown that it's a really important tool, but we know the impacts are much higher if it's actually integrated into learning and used by teachers on a day-to-day situation. We know it's also enabled people to work from home. So that is systematic, and it's meaningful impacts that we have across low middle income countries. However, as you pointed out, and as Isabel pointed out, this is hugely disparate who's online and who's offline. While in South Asia, for example, we have connected over 90% of populations to a mobile phone, a basic mobile phone. We've done a very poor job of connecting these people to the actual internet, even broadly defined, even if we include a Facebook account. We are still talking about 30 to 40% of the population or less above the age of 15, and this is systematic evidence of actually using the internet in any way. Not only that, the disparities between urban and rural are significant across South Asia, though not as dire as African countries. So, for example, in Pakistan, there's a 25% urban-rural gap compared to, let's say, 88% in Rwanda. So Asia is doing okay. Where Asia is shocking is when it comes to the gender gap, because a lot of these ICT indicators track GDP. The richer you are, the better you do on these ICT and digitalization indicators. But the gender gap in India, Bangladesh, Pakistan are like 66, 60, and 50%, right? Compared to like Uganda, a poorer country, at 6%. More in line with Mozambique, the poorest country among 20 that recently studied. So there's a huge problem. Let's move to businesses, and our constituents are micro, small, medium businesses, quite different from the large companies. Again, the evidence is clear that there's a very strong correlation between ICT use and enterprise growth for SMMEs, small, medium, and micro enterprises. They have higher efficiency, higher revenues, and so on. However, yet again, when it comes to things that really make the economy of businesses grow, like the use of e-commerce, there's a long way to go. Only 6% of small, medium businesses in many of these countries or less take contactless cards, for example, something that's really important under COVID. And people don't trust the full value chain of e-commerce. When we ask people about buying on platforms, goods, about one-third search, about another one-third search and place the order, but don't pay, and they pay cash on delivery. The barriers are ICTs, but also non-ICTs. They are asked to, small businesses are asked to formalize without getting any benefits in return. They don't have access to finances. My third point, again related to development, is that the wave of digitization and the digitalization is also a huge opportunity and has been used by my organization, many other researchers. For example, using the trace that the cell phones leave on telecom operators' networks to understand how disease spread, because that is the biggest proxy for movement of people when 90% of your population are walking around with a basic phone. It helps you map the city and understand where people live and work, where people
Absolutely.
travel from, and you plan transport. These are all development related issues. And this has been done. There's also increasing use of algorithms and automated decision making and AI as job creation and for, let's say, the handing out of welfare. But again, the danger here comes because the soft infrastructure of data protection, privacy, and general rule of law are not fully developed, but digitization is going much faster than that. So we are potentially exposing large numbers of people to more of the dangers increasingly compared to the benefits. And this is, I think, where Europe can really set the tone, because Europe, particularly when it comes to privacy data protection, sets the norms. People adopting GDPR in the absence of much else. But this also, because of the rather rigid nature of, for example, if you want to trade in data and run an offshore business, you have to comply. And there are no exceptions, like even trade agreements allow for least developed countries a slower path to compliance, for example, right?
Sure.
But there is no exception or variation here. Big businesses and small businesses are subject to this. And in this kind of situation, it's hard for businesses. While it is absolutely the aspirational goal to have that kind of data protection, it makes it hard for small businesses. It also makes it hard for governments and makes the more authoritarian sort of attitudes about data protection, securitization, quite attractive as a counterbalance from a government point of view, particularly for less well-governed countries. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Helen. I mean, you know, there's a plethora of issues there, which are really points really well made. But what we've known from our experience, and you make that really well, is that tech players, the larger ones, basically rushed ahead. And just said, devil may care in terms of governments haven't caught up. We are now catching up. There's something about the learning of the past 10 years, you say, about when you think that GDPR from Europe is a brilliant mechanism. It's one of these kind of brands of Europe. A bit late, but it's there. But there's something about the learning that we need to take from that, because when we think about what's happening in relation to tech development per se, both software and hardware, it's phenomenal. We haven't even talked about 5G yet, but other countries are thinking about 7, 10, etc. Especially China is moving at a pace, and other Asian countries. And there's something about, just very briefly, in your experience so far, some of the reports that I've been looking at in the OECD and others about how do you get the big tech players that have benefited the most, not only in the past 20 years, but also from this crisis, to pay back and pay forward? Have you had an example of any companies doing that? And Ashish, I'm putting you on warning that I'm going to come back to you on that point. Not to put you on the spot, but sort of. Go on. Helani, any examples?
Yeah, no, there aren't. And that's exactly the problem. You talked about competition on platforms from, let's say, India or Sri Lanka or Bangladesh. They are registered in these countries. They have human beings and officers, and they're paying taxes. Okay. The OTT players who are running platforms are not. Now, there are some exceptions who have negotiated at city level, at country level to collect and pay taxes. But there's a hugely uneven playing field when it comes to large, particularly foreign players who do not have a process that can be taxed. While the richness of the data of the people from India and Sri Lanka are adding value to the platform, and of course it's making their lives better, it's not actually directly contributing revenue.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Andre. You've been patient with that fantastic backdrop of Jedi, it's associated with you. You're also, just for the benefit of others, he's one of our European young leaders, one of our alumni. And you've been kind of in this space for a long time, Andre, and you've been advising in the French government. You set up Jedi. From your perspective, and I know that, you've spoken a lot about your kind of frustration about the fact that Europe could be better at scaling up. But in this context, what I want to hear from you is what's happening, what are the implications and what's happening around the fragmentation of the sector, the tech sector, and then build on what you've heard so far. So over to you, Andre.
Thank you, Damandra. Well, I'm not frustrated. I'm just thinking that the opportunity is there. But look at what's going on. And I liked Isabel's comment on women. It's not about women or men. It's about today's world. What counts is speed, is anticipation, and is execution. And my first point would be, it's good to have regulation, but if we're not able to implement them, they are almost worthless. And today I'm going to put a point today, and we saw that with the last US election, platforms have a much bigger regulatory power on public opinion and speech than any GDPR. By the way, we are going to publish, because I think this is one of these taboos in Europe, GDPR, we were right on the value side, but today GDPR is acting as a fantastic barrier of entry for all the new players, the small players, who are there, the European players, the Indian players, the South Asian players. Look at how Apple and Facebook today portray themselves as the heroes of privacy. I'm going to make a second point. Civil society. Mr. Schrems has today more regulatory power, more power at all than Ms. Vestager. And I think Ms. Vestager is doing that in a lot of good faith, but look at how her action against Apple for the moment backfired. And he is more effective, this young man from Austria, in helping on privacy than the big regulation. So my second point is, where is the civil society? And I'm both French and German. I just hope that Europe, especially in its digital diplomacy, will be more, I would say, German, or more, I would say, focused on the civil society, on the foundations, rather than thinking that big state can save us. Because for the moment, the European big states is not saving us. So maybe a few proposals here on the way forward between.
Good, that's what we're interested in. What do you think we should do?
Europe. First, there was a question about from Ms. Yi, why do we don't have these big digital platforms? A third of the people in the Facebook AI division are French, 15% are German. But why are they in Menlo Park? Simply because one of the things we failed collectively is we don't have a big digital market in Europe. And so I'm asking myself, where is the European diplomacy? Why is it China? And Mr. and Stefan put it very well. It's actually China who was able to create, despite China having very few friends in Southeast Asia, if any friend, they were able to create this big trade bloc. It's good to have dialogues. Where is the European single digital market with, I would say, all the other countries except the US or China? That would be a very concrete thing. And I think Indonesia, Vietnam, probably India would actually be helpful, because what counts in tech, the risk is everywhere the same, but the upside, that's maybe your answer, Ms. Yi, is totally different. So that's why people don't make these fortunes. The consequence on the value distribution that Isabel pointed is very correct, but it's a consequence. What are we waiting for? It's the same thing with the single capital market. That is really a failure of probably we're too busy with Brexit, probably we're too busy with a permanent 6 months European semester. It's terrible because we go from one urgency to another. A second and last proposal is probably Europe lacks audacity. Yes. On that one, I will take the Chinese example from Asia. Why don't we ask the big platforms to localize? Why don't we ask Amazon, you want to do business here? You need to have 51% of your equity and your shareholders European. If you don't like it, goodbye. This would not cost us any money. And this was immediately allow what the Chinese did very smartly in all industries, allow our local players to be much better. Look, we are using Zoom right now. And that is, I'm going to end on a positive note. Zoom did not exist 7 years ago. So exactly. This tendency to think that the big tech now are here forever. No, technology is ever changing. What we need to make sure is to invent the next big thing. And this is why we are so motivated on creating the technologies of tomorrow and not battling the battles of today. So we need to have, again, this compass, this vision. Yes, I would like to see more of that in Europe.
Andre, as ever, thoughtful, provocative, and insightful. I love it. But you know, those points are really very well made, and it's a shame that we did try, colleagues, to get the European Commission, but they were not possible. It wasn't possible to have the directors from some of the DG Connect and others here, which is a pity. But you make that point extremely well. One of the things I think that I think we're paying little attention to. People have talked about it, about this new regional comprehensive economic partnership. I think that's going to create a massive new wave, and in a positive way. But I think there's every potential that if the EU doesn't get its act together in terms of diplomatic engagement, it may backfire, or we might be left behind and people go elsewhere. I want to bring in, and I will come back to Isabel and Stefan and others in the last 10 minutes or 5 minutes I've got, but I want to go to our Twitter, our live stream audience, Twitter. We have a question from our Twitter colleagues. Alex, welcome.
Hi, Dharmendra. Good morning, everybody. Yes, so our Twitter question today, it comes from the idea talking about using EU regulation to help South Asian companies. And our Twitter user says, this prompts the question, how is more regulation going to help new players? It just raises the bar.
Mm-hmm. Which is a point that Andre was making, controversially or otherwise, but he's the point there. But the thing is that if you want to make sure, I suppose, that you need to have the levels of standards and protection, what's the alternative? Are there different stages that we need to be thinking about? I'm going to go to Arnaldo Abruzzini. I hope I've pronounced your name correctly. Hello.
Absolutely. Hello.
Thank you. Hello. Tell us, where are you from? Are you as a concerned citizen? Are you representing an organization?
Well, now I'm one of those that has applied the South flexible work, meaning that I moved from Brussels, thanks to the smart working, to Italy. And I'm enjoying the sun and the warm weather here. I've been for 21 years the CEO of Eurochambers, the European Organization of Chambers of Commerce and Industry, and now I'm back in my own business, which is on the telecom and digital.
So you bring an interesting perspective. I'm glad you've come in. Tell us, what's your reaction to some of this, but also your question, if you have a question.
I think that I want to build my intervention on what Andre was elaborating on.
Mm.
Business behave very much like human beings, and human beings behave accordingly to the environment they are used to live in. Now, if you compare our standard of living in Europe and in US, in China, the way we act, we react, we move, we govern, business adapt themselves with the same standards. Now, what does that mean? That it is very difficult today to believe that Europe can have any edge in the digital development that we are facing, that we are witnessing in our daily life, because the behavior we apply in Europe is a conservative, traditionally preventing anybody else to do something better than we do. This is why the European Union has been created, to avoid something bad, but to avoid something, not to allow and empower. Now, if we want to have a different relationship with the Asian world, which is on the other side of this mirror, they look for empowering people in doing things, which is very similar to the West, far west on the US. Their cultural approach is to empower people. Now, if in Europe we want to do something, and if we want to empower our business to connect with the rest of the world and to develop the technological edge that we are in deeply need of, we need to change our cultural approach.
Okay. Thank you for that. And I'll see what people say. I'm running out of time. Thank you for coming in. And also, it'd be good, for if you've got other thoughts about what you'd say to the current College of Commissioners on this agenda, what would that advice be? But not for you to come on now, but for you to perhaps put on the Zoom. I have Richard Ghiazzi, very briefly, because I'm running out of time, desperately.
Right.
Hello,
Thank
Richard.
you.
Say
Hi
who you
there.
are, where you're from. Hello.
Right. I'm with the Light and Asia Center. And so half a decade ago, China introduced the Digital Silk Road. It's a subset of its BRI initiative. It's exceptionally ambitious, and it's made major strides, but it's been moving in a quite stealth fashion. We at LAC, we've been conducting quite a bit of research, and we've identified a lot of strategic implications. We're doing it with a partner in India, so implications for the EU, implications for India. But I was wondering, as for the panelists, in particular Isabel and Stefan, to what extent are they aware of this Digital Silk Road, and to what extent do they view its implications as and opportunities, I must say, as important? Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful. But also, what would be good is that you make that point. Is the long-term planning really the competitive advantage that China engages in? And what are the other kind of lessons from? Not for you to answer right now, but put on the Zoom chat, please, because I'm running out of time. But I'd be really interested in your view, because you raised that point. What is it as a result when we go back to speakers? I am going to skip ferociously to kind of carry on for a couple of more minutes just after 10, if we may. But I know that before I go back to some of our speakers, Yuen, you wanted to come in, but I could ask you, you have 60 seconds. And I know that's tough, but I've only got 5 minutes left. So Yuen, briefly, because you're itching to respond. Come back, tell us.
Yes, thank you. Very short. I think just react to our previous speaker. I think people in Europe should not be too optimistic or too naive about the situation in China. I come from China. I use the Chinese digital platform every day. But I think in China there are also indeed all kinds of problems. They have everything is a balance. I think Europe, it is not too late to have a policy that can balance the business development to have the digital platform leader from Europe, and at the same time to maintain or uphold our value and principles. Thank you.
Thank you. Well said. Thank you very much. I want to go back to, very briefly, to kind of bring back some of our speakers for like a 60-second kind of reaction. Stefan, I really want to hear from you in terms of your reaction to what we've heard, especially this is about how do we, come out of the worst economic crisis in history. We know that some people, I think a lot of politicians are still living in the sense that actually we can still do business as we've always done. And what we know at the moment is actually we need to upend that thinking and really think dramatically differently. Just react to what some of the things you've heard so far.
Yeah, thank you very much. And to come back to our main question, the cooperation between the European Union and Asia, let me highlight 2 points. One is, can regulation help the companies to cooperate between EU and Asia? I think regulation can help, but in cooperation. So therefore, in my opinion, we need a flexible regulatory framework. And in addition, we need a safe regulation and a safe voluntary regulation by the companies that fits with this flexible regulatory framework to develop new models. And the other question was about data localization. So I think also in the field of data policy, we need a flexible regulatory framework. So the principle must be that we need the free flow of data, but there must also be some exceptions. And therefore, we are working in Europe with a Gaia X project in designing a European infrastructure open for all parts of the world. And within this infrastructure, within this Gaia X project, we have the possibility that the companies can decide if they want to share their data, if they don't want to share their data, if they want to share their data, with whom, with which countries, and so on. And I think this is the best way so that the companies themselves can develop business models. Thank you so much.
Stefan, thank you very much for joining us. Andre, can I very briefly come back to you before I go back to Helani and others? Andre, in terms of, you've seen what's been happening, your comments are well received, but is there a kind of a need for a platform? We've seen a lot of things happening in Europe where you bring these techies together and they hug and get nerdy. No, I don't mean that in that way, but actually think about innovation, think about, working together in a different way. Is there something that's emerging, which is EU-Asia tech players coming together that can perhaps provide the kind of, let's say, the kind of underground kind of, not underground, but the growth for a different kind of energy and support and movement? Are you aware of any?
Well, look, I think we need to build on our strengths. And again, when I say about looking at the next big thing, we should not try to do a Google or an Amazon. This is today. What will come tomorrow? Somebody said we should not miss the Green Deal. I'm personally very happy about Biden winning the election, but worried because I don't think it's good news for European in its own interest, because he will be much more first lenient to the big tech. And secondly, you will see the Green Deal in the US probably executed much faster than here in Europe. Of course, it's open. So it's already 55% of batteries who are produced in China and 99% of the solar panels. So what I want to say in digital is we have indeed probably be much more conscious about privacy and data, the importance of data in Europe than anybody else. We were first, like we were first in probably the concept of sustainable development. We have difficulties transforming that into an economic advantage. And it's not just about the economy. I think we all realize that technology today is an intrinsic part of our societies. The way platforms shape opinions, the way face recognition the way tracing apps shape our organization. If we are not top of the game in technology, others will impose their values to us. So how do we create, to your question, how do we create European champions that use, for example, small data? How do we do distributed face recognition? How do we do data centers that consume 10 times less than Amazon's or Google data centers? We should not try to mimic. This is the priorities I want regulators to give the compass, and then leave business and make sure. How we talk about AI, France and Germany, and Stefan, I know you were doing so much effort, but the AI strategy in France is totally different than the AI strategy in Germany. So in 2 years, we will end up with fragmented market. We try to have the connections, but we will not have a giant. And the last point is about talent. When you have these giants, they have the capacity to buy and give an environment to our best brains. When Google bought DeepMind, the commission should have blocked that, because they bought 20 or 30% of the best brains in AI at that time. But it does not fit with our current regulatory competitive laws. We need to evolve them. It's about talent war and not just about market share. This is a 20th century concept.
Absolutely, Andre, thank you very much. And I suppose my point was about how do you create an ecology of not those who are the big players, but the emerging players between Asia and China, Asia and Europe, so we can create a very different value set or a temperament around this. These are the kind of emerging players in the field that, create that ecology and shared sense of collaboration. Helani, can I just come back to you briefly? If you want to kind of make reference to anything you've heard, especially from the point of view that you raised about those who are missing from the market.
Thank you. Yes, I think not getting revenue from the big players is a fundamental problem. However, regulating and asking them to pay taxes in every single Asian country is an option only available to the very rich Asian countries and the large populations, because they will come and set up an office in India because you've got 1.2 billion players. People, they're not going to do that in a Pacific island with 1,500. So for the Asian countries, negotiating as a regional bloc is really important, because that's when we will have economic and regional power. And this is something.
And we've got the makings of that now.
Exactly. And Europe should encourage that instead of continuously doing bilateral negotiations. Number two, I think when companies come and work with governments on one-off deals on automating and accessing data and even giving free models for flood warning to save lives, that's all very great, but the companies are not creating the level playing field for all other companies to participate, right? So they really need to think about how can other players also use this data, also come into these markets. It's not a one-off deal, and even if it is on development. And my last point, Europe still is certainly not the biggest funders in many Asian countries, unfortunately. It's China with bilateral loans, it might be Japan, and so on and so forth. But it is still important in particular sectors. So GIZ with SME development is one of them, right? I mean, they are real players. And they're working on ICTs, but they're not working on the broad soft infrastructure that we talked about on privacy, on data protection. That really needs to be a focus of development funding. Thank you.
Thank you. And that's a very good idea. And I hope we can note that, because I think it's a very specific, bold recommendation that's actually not that difficult to take up. Isabel, a lot of welcoming of your commentary. In terms of where you sit now, in terms of the role you have currently, what do you take away from this conversation in terms of what we might want to think about improving in EU-Asia digital relations?
Yes, the last word is difficult because it was really interesting to listen to the different points of view. I just want to show that, or to demonstrate that there is a useless polarization between rule of law, old regulation, old culture, and on the other hand, the fantastic digital market. I think that we have to go out of those two positions and try to look how rule of law or regulation are not especially the enemy of the creativity or the innovation. And I think that if we continue to oppose those two worlds, I think that we will not really identify which are the rules or the regulation or the values. And that's also related to the cultural approach that was mentioned before. Yes, there is a different cultural approach. We cannot ask to all the Europeans to change their culture. That's not. We have to respect ourselves. Second thing, I think that we have also to look at a women issue. I think that it's something also which could help in STEM, and I'm sure that women are sometimes more pragmatic and could help to identify which are the level of flexibility and the level of necessity to really support concretely the smallest one, the small platforms. And thirdly, I think that in the relationship between EU and Asia, I think that, yes, what is important is also to help part of Asia which are completely excluded of the benefit. And it's that's, I think, the region where we have to invest in our relationship between the EU and this part of the world. So yes, I think that the COVID-19 show us that vulnerability of our system, and we cannot be blind regarding what could happen if we are really trying that the digital world is a world without rules, and just where the biggest could really continue to develop a business model without looking at how it had to be regulated and where it has to be done, because it was a question of the on the chat. I think that, of course, there is not a multilateral place, or because we know that the multilateral system is not so easy today, even with Biden. But I think that WTO, the World Trade Organization, is one place where some rules regarding e-commerce, that's only trade, electronic transaction, has to be a place where we have to find an agreement on that, but it will not be easy.
No, because there's a lot of talk about reform, obviously, for a variety of reasons, some political, but some genuine. But you're quite right. There isn't a multilateral institution that's really kind of up to the job of what we're encountering right now, but they should be, and they must be. And I think that, people like you and others who are involved in those, a power to your elbow to moving that. But I think, neuroscience has proven to us that the more women you have in a company, but at board level and in a company, leads to better decisions and better effectiveness as well. And we just need to kind of just be aware of that and not be apologetic about that, but we do know something about that quite energetically if we're going to move forward. I'm going to come finally, therefore, on that point and others, to Ashish. Ashish, a tall order I have for you. is that we've partnered on this discussion, and it's been rich, it's been really helpful. For your perspective, in terms of, give us some of your responses to the point I made about you could be one of the biggest tech players in the world in the next 5 years, let's say, for example. What we given that point about how do companies pay back and pay forward, is there a strategy in place at HCL that you're doing that? Where are women in your workplace in that regard? And I suppose in terms of the tech player, what role can you play in this Asia EU relationship development? So 3 very big questions, but with very little bit of time. Ashish, over to you.
Okay, thanks a lot. So the way I think, first of all, it's been an absolutely wonderful conversation. Some of the points which have been made, especially by Andre, and I think Richard talked about the digital Silk Road, right? We really need to recognize that we are living in 3 worlds, right? Each one of them are distinct, but each one of them also interact with each other. There is the physical world, right, which is largely what regulations and so on and so forth have been built for. There is the digital world, which is getting created. Obviously, it got created more in Silicon Valley, and then China has done an absolutely fantastic job in creating platforms of the future, right? But the technology world is a moving world. I think Andre made that point very, very clearly. It's a world in which don't be too surprised if in the next 3, 5, 7 years, you will start to see some great, organizations and platforms emerging out of Europe. So the way I look at it is, companies like HCL, our primary role is to enable, organizations to become more powerful using tech, right? That's what we do every day in Europe with all the largest of corporations. And we are doing some absolutely fantastic work with them to help them converge these 3 worlds and take advantage of their natural position of those markets to become even more powerful. So don't underestimate the power of technology to reinvigorate your existing businesses, compete in this new world is issue number 1, right? Issue number 2 is I completely agree that there needs to be a better framework, a better architecture on what has been described as the let's say the soft infrastructure which underpins the rules and regulations under which this is done. GDPR is absolutely a fantastic example. I think digital identity is a topic I haven't heard anybody talk about. It's absolutely at the heart of what needs to be thought about, both for individuals and for firms, including MSMEs. You have to think about digital identity as a core competency, and that has to be sort of built. Now let me quickly jump to the question of women, right? I'm a father of 2 girls, right? And I have a lot of colleagues who have been coaching in terms of women talent. The Indian IT industry today has about maybe 35-40% of our workforce as women, right? How did all this change in the last maybe 15 years, right? When I entered, maybe the ratio of women who were entering the workforce in IT was not even 5 or 7%. It just changed because I think people realized that technology could be a very nice place where women could make a massive contribution. It actually helps manage some of the work-life balances, and therefore we started seeing a huge amount of people get into the STEM subjects, get into computer engineering, and from those computer engineering, companies like HCL sort of absorb them into the workforce, right? So I would say the primary thrust of getting more women to impact technology needs to start happening in primary schools and in secondary schools. Unless and until it happens over there, you're not going to see a full push through of all of this into the sort of larger tech ecosystem. And I completely agree. A world in which you find more women is actually a lot more balanced, a lot more creative, right? And you'll find a lot more empathy in the way in which we build businesses. So I would really say that regulation is important, but you can't outcompete the world, right, using regulation. You will have to outcompete using innovation. You will have to outcompete using factors which take advantage of where the technology puck is going, right? That is where the advantages are. There's a lot which Europe already has, we really need to look at all the strengths which we have, right? And find a way to convert these strengths to, play the game of the future better. That's really the way I would sort of summarize.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Thank you all. Firstly, thank you, our speakers, for contributing. I've run out of time. It feels like this conversation should continue. And, what you should do is be plugged to our website, because we are, there's elements of this conversation in a particular way and a very specific way in our forthcoming EU-China forum, a framework of our EU-China discussions, where we will be having 2 days of discussions around these topics, but focused around the EU-China relationship in very specific terms. So please do look at our website for the conversations coming. But also, I think the other domain of digital is space. And so again, please do keep an eye on our website, because we're going to have a very interesting conversation about the digital twin Earth that's going to be happening in a week's time, which I think we haven't even thought of. It's like in a different phase. It's like Star Wars in a very different way. And I'm not a Star Wars junkie, but my goodness, when you think about what the digital twin Earth and satellites are doing, it's like this conversation is out of date almost. So could join us for some of that conversation. And I suppose finally is that it feels like this conversation should continue, and we'd look forward to engaging you again. And if you're interested, I think that what we should try and do is involve some of the partners from this new block, this new trading block in Asia. Let's bring them online to have this conversation with you and others about what does that mean for EU-Asia relations. And I look forward to, if you have any ideas about that or wish to participate in something like that, let us know so we can think about that. And finally, we are, from our part, I hope that we can play a role as a think tank that has a significant presence in different parts of the world. And what we're going to try and seed is a network of diplomats, so a diplomatic network where we want to bring in small to medium and other countries, so that we're providing a platform for countries to have a conversation of like this, which is not connected to the G7 or the G20 or whatever, but using us, if you like, in the best possible sense, I mean, to create a platform for countries to come together. And so if you're interested in that, those of you who are on the line, diplomats, please get in touch. We hope to launch it next year. And I think it's a way of us being able to create, if you like, that independent, critical friend knowledge platform for diplomats across the world. So firstly, thank you very much. I want to thank our Zoom people and our live stream. This wouldn't be happening if you were online and engaging with us. So I want to thank you all for being with us and engaging and sharing your thoughts and ideas. And as I said, continue on the Zoom chat. Please put your comments there. We'll capture it and we'll be getting back to you on other things. As I said, keep an eye on our website. Thank you all very much. Take care, mind your distance, and be safe. See you again. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.